Salvete omnes? What is in chapter 22? Well, I'll tell you. We're dealing with the dative case, and you've been seeing this case all along. It's used for nouns and adjectives, but now finally in chapter 22 they're presenting it to you formally. The most important use, or most common use rather, of the dative case is for the indirect object. So we'll talk about what that means. In general, though, you can often use the translations to or for with a noun and adjective in the dative case. You can think of the numbers 2 or 4. Often used with intransitive verbs, we'll talk about that, and other verbs that just take a dative instead of an accusative, and also with impersonal verbs. Also in this chapter is a little discussion on third declension adjectives of what are called one-termination. That's on page 54. And then, since this is the last case, another chart with all the endings in it for nouns and adjectives. Little section on dative versus ablative, and cultural stuff. Okay, so I'd like these little checklists. I know the Latin endings of the dative case by heart. I know the special forms of Latin pronouns in the dative. I know that dative case is often translated with 2 or 4 before the noun and the dative. The most common use of the dative case is the indirect object. Dative case with intransitive verbs. Dative case with certain verbs that just take a dative instead of an accusative. Dative case with impersonal verbs like necesse est, it is necessary. And then I know how to work with third declension adjectives of one termination, and I can review, or I have reviewed, the full declension of nouns and adjectives for declensions 1, 2, 3. See the chart on page 53. Alright, now, so here we're focusing on the dative. So what are the dative endings for the first 3 declensions? Please pause the video and fill in this chart. Oh, and here's our little friend. We'll call him Crispus, which means curly. Well, how'd you do? Here are the answers. So in the first declension, we have AE for all dative singulars in the singular and long IS in the plural. For example, like 2 or 4 the girl, that'd be puelli, or 2 or 4 the girls, puelis. For second declension, the singular is an O, so if you want to say 2 or 4 the boy, that'd be puero. I'm giving food to the boy. If you're giving something to the boys, well, you need the plural dative, pueris. And third declension is a long I in the singular. So if you're giving something to your brother, that would be fratri. Or if you're giving something to your brothers, fratribus. So again, the dative case is most commonly used for the indirect object and after certain verbs and special adjectives. We'll learn other stuff later, in later chapters with the dative. And remember to use 2 or 4 commonly when translating a dative noun and adjective into English. Okay, now based on our discussions in class, what did we just say, or what is the indirect object? And and definition of the indirect object, please fill those out. And here are some examples here of indirect objects. So Crispus is saying, pause the video and try to figure out how to translate these sentences. At least translate the datives. Push pause now. So again, the indirect object is the most common use of the dative. And here's a good definition of the indirect object, which I want you to know for the quiz. It's the noun, usually a person, that receives the direct object with verbs of giving, showing, telling, and trusting/believing. So, for example, Cornelia omnia Marco explicavit. Cornelia explained everything, that's omnia, to Marcus. So Marcus is getting everything explained to him. He's receiving omnia. So Marcus is the indirect object with a verb of telling or showing here. Number 2, Cornelius Dabat was giving mandata orders, mandata, servis, to the slaves. So the slaves are indirect object. They were receiving the direct object, the commands or the orders. Number 3, Cornelius narravit, told or has told, a fabulum, the story, uxori, to his wife. This is a third declension noun, so long I for the dative singular. The wife is the indirect object because she's receiving the story, the fabulum. You could also say Cornelius told his wife the story. Number 4, my slaves, seri mei, possunt, are able to prepare a bonam canam, a good dinner, and here's our dative, vobis omnibus, for you all. So here we're using the for translation, whereas in the previous examples we used the to translation. And this is indirect object, they're receiving, you all are receiving a good dinner. So accusatives, am here, datives for the people receiving the good dinner. And this might also be a good time to bring up the point of for, where if there's any idea of benefit or advantage for someone, that someone would go into the dative case. Alright, little sidestepping here. Just a quick meaning of the word dative. The word dative is derived from the verb to give. Do, dare, dedi, datis. Remember that giving is the most common usage of the indirect object. You could also have verbs of showing and telling and trusting and believing, but giving is most common, so that is where our word dative comes from do, dare, dedi, datis, to give. Alright, take a look at this. Special note on the to and for translations. Sometimes in English we can omit the to or for translation with the dative by moving the words around, putting the indirect object in front of the direct object in English. So, for example, number 1, Cornelius was giving orders to the slaves. You could also say Cornelius was giving the slaves orders. Please pause and look at the other examples. Alright everyone, here's a little slide on the dative used with verbs of trusting and believing. Some examples: credimus tibi, we believe you. Tibi is the indirect object of the pronoun for you. Alright, and here's mondo, I trust or entrust the pecuniam, the money, fratribus meis, to my brothers, or less literally, I trust my brothers with the money. Alright, these should be learned for the quiz. The dative forms of pronouns. So how do you say to or for me, or to for you singular, to or for us? So pause the video and fill in these blanks. To or for them. Alright, here are the answers. Repeat the Latin after I say it. Mihi is to or for me. Nobis, to or for us. Tibi, to or for you singular. Vobis, to or for y'all, or you plural. Ei is third person, so to or for him, or to or for her, or to or for it. And put an S on it, eis, that would be to or for them, all three genders. Que, actually this is probably short I, means to or for whom. And quibus is plural, to or for whom. And third person reflexive, we will see this soon. Sibi, to or for himself, herself, itself. Reflexive means referring back to the subject. And the plural is actually the same form in Latin, but your subject will be plural. So it'll be to or for themselves, whatever gender is your subject. Okay, now let's move beyond the indirect object and look at other uses of the dative case. Now the dative case is often used with intransitive verbs, and these are verbs that do not take direct objects. So often, you look for things that are an accusative, but those are usually direct objects. For example, verbs of motion running, walking, swimming are used in transitively in Latin. So you'll see more datives with those. Here's some others. Marcus sexto clamavit. Marcus shouted to Sextus. So, or at Sextus. So, that sexto is dative with this intransitive verb clamavit. Elvis appeared. Okay, that's our intransitive verb. Matri mei, to my mother. That's our dative. In a dream. Alright, now here's a very, very common intransitive verb, the verb appropinquare, which is a verb from the preposition prope, which means near. So it means to get nearer to or approach. Now you can have two constructions with this. Either to use the dative, with the thing being approached, or you can use ad plus the accusative of motion towards. So here we go. We could say, appropinquabamus, we were mock soon approaching the inn. So you can use put in, because that's what we're approaching, in the dative case, or use the other construction, ad plus the accusative. Here's another example. Already, appropinquabant, they were approaching the city. So city is third declension, dative singular. Or you could have written this ad urbem, ad plus the accusative, motion towards. Now, hello, we have yet another use. Dative is commonly used with impersonal verbs like necesse est or licet. So impersonal, you just think of it, generic it, like it is necessary, or licet, it is permitted. So here's an example. Cur, why is it necessary, necesse est, quoque, also mihi, here's our pronoun, for me, redire, to return, ad urbem. Or licetne nobis, is it permitted for us, nobis, or may we, cenare, dine here, eat dinner here. Alright, now this card is more of an FYI for future reference. The dative is commonly used with something called compound verbs, and we've seen this a little bit. And that means verbs that have a prefix in front of them. So, for example, appropinquare is actually the prefix ad, or a preposition ad attached to the idea of prope. Occurre is the preposition ab plus curro, to run, and when you put it with ab, it means to meet up, run into someone, and that person you run into is in the dative. Praesum means to be in charge of. Okay, so whatever you're in charge of goes into the dative. Persuadere, per is compounded to the front, means to persuade. So if I persuade Frank to do something, Frank would go into the dative case. So here are two examples. Harry, yesterday, occurri, I ran into, patri tuo, your father. So this goes into the dative with compound. Next sentence. Cicero, that's our nominative. Cicero, yesterday, priorat, was in charge of the Senate, dative, after this compound verb, priorat. Dum, while, Pompey was absent. Alright, now do your best not to confuse the dative versus the ablative. They both have very, very similar endings. Look at the chart in the book in this chapter to see how similar they are. In fact, in the plural, the ablative and the dative have the same endings. So how are we going to deal with it? Well, you could use context clues to help determine if the form is ablative or dative. Remember the dative translation is to or for often, and ablative is WFBIOU, or with, by, from, in, on, out of, or under. If there's a preposition before the form, it is ablative and not dative. Lastly, an adjective might help. Oh, if we go back to this preposition idea, if there is not a preposition, it's probably a dative. Alright guys, now the last thing they're talking about is actually something you've already studied back in chapter 19, third declension adjectives, but they're focusing on something called one-termination adjectives. Now, third declension adjectives are categorized as either third termination, or two termination, or one termination. And these numbers, third termination, two termination, simply mean the number of forms in the nominative. So, for example, third declension adjectives of the three termination type, like caler, caleris, calere, the word for fast, have one form for each gender. Caler is masculine, caleris is feminine, and calere, of course, with the E, is neuter. Moving to third declension adjectives of two terminations, like fortis, forte, the word for brave, they have one nominative form for masculine and feminine, that's fortis, and the other, which ends in an E, for the neuter, forte. So masculine and feminine always have the same forms. Now finally, we have third declension adjectives of one termination, like ingens, ingentis, huge, or par, paris, equal, or diligens, diligentis, careful. Now they have only one nominative form for all three genders. So ingens is masculine, feminine, and neuter. Now notice there's a second word which always ends in a short is, ingentis here, or paris. That is the genitive singular, which is given to remind us that the adjective belongs to the third declension. You must have is in a dictionary entry for third declension. And it's also given to indicate if there is a stem change. There isn't one for par paris, but there is from ingens to ingentis. Notice the S drops out, rather, and we get the T. Alright guys, with that in mind, try to decline and translate the third declension adjective ingens ingentis of one termination, huge, with the noun oculus oculi, the second declension noun, masculine, which means I, into all its possible forms. Crispus says pause the video now and do that. Pause the video now. Okay, now here are the answers. Pause this and see how you did on your paper. Notice the IUM is for the I stem genitive plural. Okay, now let's try it again, this time with the first declension noun, copia, copiae, supply or amount, and matching that is the third declension adjective of one termination, par paris, which means equal. So Crispus says pause the video now and fill this out. Pause it now. Right, well how do we do? Here are the answers. The equal supply or of an equal supply. Please pause the video and check your answers. Alright, now one more, again using ingens ingentis with the word soxum soxi, which is the word for rock, and it is neuter, so keep that in mind, remember the neuter rule. Please pause the video now. Alright guys, how do we do? Here's the Latin with the English translations. Notice I put in red ingens, because that's following the neuter rule. The accusative and the vocative must equal the nominative. So same thing here in the plural. Please pause the video and check your responses. Alright, now we've reached the point. We've reached a great pinnacle, a great plateau of understanding. We have formally been taught all the endings for the first three declensions. So please, Crispus says, pause the video and fill out this chart. Hopefully by memory. Alright, how do we do? Here's the singular. First declension. Second declension here. Second declension neuter here. Third declension masculine feminine. Remember they always have the same forms. And neuter will have a slightly different column. Alright, now Crispus says try it again with the plural for all the three declensions. Hopefully you can do it by memory. So pause the video now and do that. Right then, how do we do? Here are the answers. Please check your responses with this answer key here. One thing I didn't add were the I stems in the plural, which would be IUM here, and IA for neuter plural. Check our last chart we did with the ingentia for that. Alright, now the rest of the video's review. Crispus says, focus on the dative again. What are the dative, singular, and plural endings for the first two declensions? Pause the video now, please. Alright, here are the answers. Hopefully you've got all these. Pause the video and check. Alright, now please pause the video now and answer these questions that are also in your worksheet for this chapter. Okay, please pause the video again, and here are the answers. Number 3, the indirect object is the noun, usually a person that receives the direct object, and the indirect object is commonly used with verbs of giving, showing, telling, trusting, and believing. Alright, now Crispus says pause the video again and fill out items 4 and 5 also found on your worksheet. Alright, hopefully you can do number 4 on your own. Just remember, sometimes you can use 2 or 4, sometimes leave it out. In 5, you got intransitive verbs, the verb a propinquare, and impersonal verbs. Alright, Crispus says pause this slide and fill in the forms for the Latin pronouns in the dative case. Alright, here are the answers. Take a good look at those. Please pause the video and check your responses. Okay, now pause this slide and please circle all the datives you find in these 4 sentences and then give a translation. Pause the video now. Okay, so I circled the datives. Number 1, mother and father gave, that's the perfect of do, dore, gave our dog to the happy boy. Number 2, Septimius explained everything day about the dead Alice to the citizens. So the first 2 are indirect objects. Number 3, here's another dative. It is necessary mihi, for me, dare, to give food to my horses. So mihi is dative with the impersonal verb necesse est. Equis meis is dative with the verb of giving, dare. Number 4, in the evening we were approaching the small city. So dative with the verb a propinquare, which is also an intransitive verb. Yay! So let's do it again. We finally learned all the cases. At this point it makes sense to review the full chart. See pages 53 and 55. Fill in the chart horizontally this time. It's something new. It's another great way to see the similarities in the cases. Please pause the video and fill in the rest of the charts. I just gave you the dative, or the genitive singular. I also gave you the third declension adjective forms. So pause the video now. Okay, pause the video and underline the words that are in the dative case. Good. The mother prepared dinner for the girl. And the other one, the mother prepared dinner for the girls, dative plural. So here we're using the for translation. Again, for their benefit. Alright, same idea. Pause the video, underline the datives, and give a translation. Pause video now. Alright, very good. The miles, the soldier, narrawit, told a fabulum, a story, to the boy, dative singular. Here we have the soldier told the story to the boys, plural. Those are indirect objects. Alright, again, underline the words that are in the dative case and translate. Pause the video now. Alright, so Sextus monstravit showed the carriage, patri is our dative, to his father. Sextus showed the carriage to his parents, matri et patri. Alright, here's a good legal phrase, legal Latin. Cui bono. Qui, to whom, is it a good thing? I.e., to whom does it benefit? So who benefits from mother making dinner? Well, here it's the girl, and here it's the girls. So the beneficiary would go, the beneficiary of the good dinner, or the dinner, goes into the dative case. Same idea. The dative case shows who benefits from the action of the verb, here showing or pointing out. Please pause the video and review this. In the blanks above, give the singular and plural forms for each declension. First declension, second, and third. Pause the video now. Alright, on this slide, here's some datives from sentences from previous chapters, and how did you translate them earlier. So look at the underlined words that are in the dative and give a translation for them. And try to do the whole sentence if you can. Pause the video now. Alright, here's some more. Try to translate these sentences that have the dative, words and dative underlined. Pause the video now and translate. So remember that this is the perfect of do dare, to give. So did it. Davis gave mandata, orders, to the slave woman. Pause the video now and check your answers. Alright, replace the underlined word with the dative of the word in parentheses in each of the following sentences. Cornelius edificia pueris monstravit. So here are the answers to the first one. Cornelius monstravit showed the buildings to the boys. To the girls would be puellis. To his wife, uxori. To the carriage driver, ridario. To the children, liberis. To y'all, vobis. And to us, or us all, nobis. Please pause the video and answer. Do the same thing for this sentence with mater and this sentence with Aurelia. Please pause this slide and translate these sentences, all that have impersonal verbs, with the dative. Number 2, it is necessary for the students to facere pensum domesticum, to do their homework. And number 3, it is necessary for the teacher, female teacher, to correct the pensum domesticum, the homework of the students. Number 4, is it permitted nobis for us to dine here, says Marcus. Number 5, licene mihi, is it permitted for me to ire, to go to the water fountain? Number 6, it is not permitted for the children to drive the carriages. Alright, so here we have a little review of the dative case. Remember, it shows the person or thing who benefits from the action of the verb. This is also called the indirect object. Translate it with 2 or 4, although remember those can sometimes be removed. Its form in the plural is always the same as the ablative plural. Ablative plural and dative plural are always the same. Look for it or watch for it with verbs of giving, showing, telling, and trusting or believing. Watch out for it with impersonal verbs ecce est and licet. The dative case does not mean toward. Anything involving motion to or toward uses the preposition ad. For example, discipula fabula magistra narravit. The female student told a story to the teacher. And next one, this female student yekit threw a ball to, that's motion towards, to the teacher. Okay, again, this is a look at, is it dative or ablative? Look at the charts. Again, notice that datives and ablatives often have the same endings. In fact, in plural, they always have the same endings. This shouldn't be a problem. Helpful facts. People in the ablative always have a preposition. Look carefully at verbs to see if they're the kind that take a dative, like giving, showing, telling, or trusting. If there's a preposition, it isn't dative, it's ablative. And conversely, if there is no preposition, and it looks like dative, it probably is, instead of ablative. Also, use context in a sentence to tell which case you are seeing. He gave to the boy our dog. He beat our dog with a stick. This is ablative of means, where this is indirect object, puero. Ambulabamus, we were walking home. Cum, that's a preposition, so only prepositions take an ablative, not a dative. With friends. That's ablative of accompaniment. Alright, Crispus says, pause this video and try to decide or determine whether the underlined word in each sentence is a dative or an ablative, and then translate the sentences. Alright, here are the answers. Quibus is dative. Septimius explained everything about Daedalus to the citizens. Number 2, it is necessary for me to give food to my horses, dative. Number 3, Ramo is by means of a branch, ablative means. Marcus drove off the wolf. Number 4, Sextus shouted to or at the carriage driver, hold the horses back, beware of the ditch. So dative with intransitive verb klamawit. Number 5, habenis is ablative with the reins. The carriage driver turned the horses aside. Ablative means. Number 6, kur, why did you not give money to the slave woman? So that's dative. Number 7, the carriage driver grabbed the reins with his hands. With is ablative. Ablative means. Number 8, hospitibus is dative. We have prepared a good dinner for your guests, O master. Number 9, date, command. Give food also to the boys. Dative, indirect object, they're receiving the food. Number 10, ego in animo habeo, I have in mind. To remove the body and the dung from the inn by means of a plaustro, ablative of means. Please pause the video now and fill out these blanks with the dative singular and the dative plural. Pause the video now. Again, pause the video and fill out the blanks. Read the directions first for this activity. Pause the video now. These questions should be answered after reading the story in chapter 22. Please pause the video now. More questions to be answered after having read the chapter 22 story. Pause the video now. These questions should be answered after having read the story in chapter 22. Pause the video now. Look at more questions. Please pause the video now. More questions that should be read or filled out after reading the chapter 22 story. Pause the video now. And finally, more questions that should be answered after having read the story for chapter 20. Pause the video now and walete.